A reading from Revelation chapter 14, verses 14 through 19. Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to the one who sat on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has came, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So the one who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came from the altar, the angel who has authority over fire. And he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth, and he threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God.
In my late 20s, I compiled a list of all the great literary classics that, for whatever reason, I had never gotten around to reading in high school or college. The list included titles like Cervantes' Don Quixote, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Melville's Moby Dick, Kafka's The Metamorphosis, and among many others, Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Some of those novels took me weeks to finish, but I raced through all 581 pages of The Grapes of Wrath in just 3 days, captivated by the storytelling, the characters, the unflinching social commentary, the biblical allusions, and of course the resilience of the Joad family in the face of injustice and suffering. To this day, The Grapes of Wrath is the most elegantly written and enduringly relevant novels I have ever read. At its heart, The Grapes of Wrath is an Exodus story that parallels the biblical exodus of the Hebrew people who fled slavery in Egypt in search of the promised land of Canaan. In Steinbeck's Exodus story, the Joad family flees the hardship and desperation of Oklahoma's Dust Bowl during the Great Depression, journeying through the perilous desert in pursuit of the promised land of California, where they hope to find work in the fields and orchards and build a better life for themselves. But as the Joads travel precariously along historic Route 66 in their rickety, overloaded jalopy, they, like hundreds of thousands of other migrants making the same journey, endure hunger and breakdowns, the death of family members, the cruelty and apathy of strangers and systems, and seemingly ever-diminishing possibilities for their future. And yet somehow, despite the odds, the Joads persevere, daring at every fork in the road to will themselves forward, believing that whatever awaits them has to be better than what they've left behind. And as we follow them on their improbable journey, we feel the growing tension between hope and despair and blessing and curse, possibility and futility, and that universal human struggle of I can't go on and I must go on, knowing that for the Joads to not go on means existential defeat. Steinbeck published The Grapes of Wrath in 1939 after visiting migrant labor camps in California and observing the abysmal living conditions and hardships faced by the Dust Bowl refugees who had migrated there. He interviewed the people who were disparagingly referred to as Okies, gathering information that helped him accurately portray the desperation of their migrant experience. How else, in describing them in the book, could he write this great line, "I'm just pain covered with skin"? But despite the appalling conditions in the work camps, he encountered extraordinary generosity and compassion there. Describing the camps, Steinbeck writes, "The families, huddled together for warmth and for protection, talked together. And because they were lonely and perplexed, because they had all come from a place of sadness and worry and defeat, and because they were all going to a new mysterious place, they huddled together, shared their lives, their food, and the things they hoped for in the new country." Steinbeck had a harder time choosing a title for the book than he did writing it. His wife, Carol Henning, suggested the phrase, "the grapes of wrath," a biblical allusion to the passage for this morning from the book of Revelation. That passage reads, "So the angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine of the earth and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God." In this biblical passage, the wrath of God is God's anger over the evil that is present in the world. The grapes, the winepress, the wine, they're all metaphors. The grapes symbolize evil in the world. The winepress symbolizes God's judgment and punishment. The wine that comes from the winepress represents God's justice. And the passage seems to suggest that evil and injustice will someday be met by God's judgment. Oppressors will be punished. The enduring justice of God, like vintage wine, will prevail and once again flow over the land. But Steinbeck also derived his title for the book from that same phrase, which also appears in the famous hymn, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Steinbeck wrote his novel in the midst of a major social crisis in American history and politics, a time when the land was being overplowed and exploited by mechanization and automation, a time when corporate banks were displacing tenant farmers from their lands, a time when wealth was becoming more concentrated in the hands of the few, a time when the poor and migrant workers were getting crushed by profit margins, unlivable wages, xenophobia, and bigotry. The Battle Hymn of the Republic was written by Julia Howe in 1861 during another major social crisis, the Civil War. The opening stanza of the hymn references the biblical passage from the book of Revelation. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on." Julia Howe uses the grapes of wrath reference to predict the end of evil and the coming of justice. And by pulling his title from her hymn, Steinbeck is saying that evil is not just a matter of personal morality, but profoundly systemic and institutional. Greed, the exploitation of the earth, the oppression of migrants, the neglect of the poor. Steinbeck, like the ancient biblical prophets, is proclaiming that none of these will escape the growing wrath of the oppressed, nor will they escape the coming judgment of God. In the souls of the people, Steinbeck writes, the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. Today we can't read the novel without calling to mind our own social, political, ecological, economic context. The problems and the threats, the systemic evils of our time, they may look slightly different, but at the core they are very much the same. The desperate plight of today's immigrants and the stigma and scapegoating they endure. the growing threat of ecological disaster due to the exploitation of Earth's resources, the automation of jobs that makes the lower class expendable and more the middle class replaceable, the economic disparity and fleeting hope that fuel political extremism and radicalization, and the further consolidation of wealth into the hands of the few. These things seem to endure over time. But this great novel invites us, at the end of the day, to consider what kind of people we are becoming in the face of such challenges. The novel paints a picture of two ways we can see the world, and suggests that which of those two ways we choose to see the world will determine in large part the kind of people we become and the kind of world we will ultimately live in. One way to see the world is through the lens of scarcity, as if there is simply not enough for everyone. In the book, there's not enough land, not enough money, not enough profit, enough food, enough security, enough kindness, enough patience. Nearly everyone in the story seems to be invested in, complicit in, a system that drives them to get all that they can for however long as they can, by any means they can, before someone else gets it and it's gone. Life in the novel is lived as a zero-sum game. Some people must always lose to make the world work. This way of seeing the world through the lens of scarcity is what, in the first place, leads to the overplowed, over-harvested fields that can no longer bear crops, which soon then serve as metaphor for all those in the novel whose hearts, like fields, have fallen vacant with indifference, or hardened by greed or cruelty, or who seem prone to blame the system for why they must do the awful and inhumane things they do. There's a scene early in the novel that exemplifies this way of seeing the world, and it's emblematic of everything that seems to follow. In this particular scene, a tractor driver stops in front of a tenant farmer's shotgun house. He's come to knock down their home and drive them off the land so the bank can take it back. The driver opens his lunch, sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper, white bread, pickle, cheese, Spam, a piece of pie. And from atop his tractor, he eats while these half-starved children look on curiously. Steinbeck writes, "They watched hungrily the unwrapping of the sandwiches, and their hunger-sharpened noses smelled the pickle, cheese, and Spam. They watched his hand as it carried food to his mouth. They did not watch him chewing. Their eyes followed the hand that held the sandwich." After a while, the tenant farmer who would not leave his land came out and squatted in the shade behind the tractor. He says to the driver, "Why, you're Joe Davis's boy." "Sure," the driver says. "Well," says the farmer, "what you doing this kind of work for, against your own people?" $3 a day, says the driver. "I got sick of creeping for my dinner and not getting it. I got a wife and kids. We got to eat. $3 a day, and it comes every day." But the tenant farmer says, "But for your $3 a day, 15 or 20 families can't eat at all. Nearly 100 people have to go out and wander on the roads for your $3 a day. Is that right? Is that right?" And the driver says, "Can't think of that. $3 a day, and it comes every day. Times are changing, mister, don't you know? Nothing to do about it. You try to get $3 a day someplace. That's the only way. This is a cynical way of seeing and living in the world, isn't it? But over and over, this is the world we encounter in the Grapes of Wrath, where people turn against their own people because there seems to be not enough to go around. And then they blame the system and scapegoat the victims for their own inhumanity, shirking their moral obligation to their neighbor. And we can't help but hear the echoes of the prophet Amos, who says, "For 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth and push away the afflicted." How do you see the world? And how, by the way, you are seeing the world, are you creating the world and shaping then who you are becoming? But Steinbeck contrasts this way of seeing the world through this lens of scarcity with another way of seeing the world, a rare and courageous and neighborly and faithful way of seeing the world, which is through the lens of abundance that leads to a generous life. Throughout the novel, there are some people who still believe there's always enough to share, even when the evidence suggests that there is not. A waitress in a truck stop cafe on Route 66 who gives the wide-eyed Joe children 2 pieces of 5-cent candy and tells them they're just 2 for 1 penny. Or Ma Jode in the migrant worker camp in California, who saves just enough stew in her pot for a dozen starving camp children to scrape with a stick and have a taste, even as her own family has not had their fill. Or consider the final scene in the novel, the most controversial and scandalous scenes in the book. When the boxcar that served as the Jodes' temporary home is flooded by the engorged river during this violent rainstorm, it sweeps away their very last possessions. And it might have been the ultimate humiliation defeat, except that during the storm, as the water level rises in the boxcar, Rose of Sharon, the young, optimistic daughter, finally gives birth to the child she's been carrying since they first left Oklahoma. Only the child is stillborn. Rose's name is symbolic. The early church referred to Jesus as the Rose of Sharon, the beautiful symbol of love that rises up out of the low plains of eastern Palestine. We wonder if, when, that is, this young woman, Rose of Sharon, will finally become the Christ figure in the story. And then it happens. The Jodes flee their boxcar and take shelter from the flood in this old barn, where they encounter 2 dark figures huddled in the gloom, a man lying on his back and a little boy sitting beside him, his eyes wide, staring at these newcomers. Pointing to the man on the ground, Ma Jode asks the boy, "What's the matter with that fella?" And the boy croaks, "Fust he was sick, but now he's starving. Got sick in the cotton. He ain't ate for 6 days." Ma Jode walks to the corner and looks down at the man. He's about 50, his whiskery face gaunt, his open eyes vague and staring. "Your pa?" Ma asks. "Yeah," says the boy. "Says he wasn't hungry, or he just ate. He give me the food. Now he's too weak. Can't hardly move. Got to have soup or milk. You folks got money to get milk?" "Hush," says Ma. "Don't worry. We'll figure something out." And Ma looks at Rose of Sharon huddled in the comforter. And Ma's eyes pass Rose of Sharon's eyes, and the two women looked deep into each other. The girl's breath came short and gasping. And she says to her mother, "Yes." "I knowed you would," says Ma. "I knowed." And Rose of Sharon hoists her tired body up and draws the comforter around her. And she moves slowly to the corner and looks down at the wasted face, into the wide, frightened eyes, and slowly she lays him down beside him. He shakes his head slowly from side to side while Rose of Sharon loosens one side of the blanket. "You got to," she says. And she inches closer and pulls his head close. "There," she says, "there." And her hand moves behind his head and supports it. And she looks up and across the barn, and her lips come together, and she smiles mysteriously. In a world that lives and dies by scarcity thinking and surrenders its moral obligation by hiding behind the systems, Steinbeck here gives us a faint glimpse of what it looks like to live and act generously, but from a place of abundance. As Rose of Sharon holds that sick man's head in her hands, she holds and feeds the whole world and invites us to a whole new way of seeing the world and a whole new way of understanding our responsibility to one another, even strangers. And we hear the words of Jesus, who says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Our takeaways for today: how we see the world shapes who we are becoming. God's justice is for the oppressed, and our hands are meant to help deliver it.